All right, so welcome everyone to Strive Conversations. My name is Melissa Tele, and I'm the founder of Strive With Me, which is a platform making personal development and social change more accessible to busy people. I'm here hosting Strive Conversations, which is an event series talking about different uncomfortable topics, which today we're going to focus on sex education, how we can normalize the conversation, and hopefully find a little bit more pleasure in and outside the bedroom. And so we have an amazing panel here with us that really we're just again, 3 humans gonna have a great conversation, lots of laugh and funny things. So before we get started, I'm just gonna remind everyone, please, because with the topic of sex, I think some people get a little crazy about it, but we're all here to talk about it, help answer your questions. So we just ask that you be respectful to the speakers as well as others. Again, whatever it is your preference is, whether you love talking about sex, or you love doing it, or you're very new to this, please remember to be respectful of everyone else, as we're all on different journeys and different stages of our personal development journey, as well as our, I guess, sexy journey. And so please be respectful of that. We'd love to hear about what your experiences are, how you answer these questions as well in the chat. And then we're going to pass it off to Nicole to kick us off on this global conversation. Oh, before I get started, I completely forgot. I signed the questions and I forgot to answer my own question, which is, why is it important to have a conversation about sex and sex education? For me, it's an important conversation to have because, one, I think it's really fun to talk about sex. I understand that I have, I guess, a little bit more privileged relationship with talking about sex. Like, my mom and I do talk about sex. I talk about sex with my friends and family, with partners and different things like that. So I understand not everyone has that relationship, but hopefully that can change after this. So Nicole, it's up to you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you so much to everyone who is tuning in with us. Olive, so excited to hear what you have to share today as well. So like Melissa said, my name is Nicole Bannister. I am the founder and commissioner of my basketball team. My basketball team is a digital storytelling platform on Instagram where I publish short, sexy stories about dating, sex, and relationships that are made by people just like you from across the globe. On my basketball team, I share one story a day, every single day, and I hope that by sharing people's real, honest, hilarious, spontaneous, and awkward sex, that we begin to normalize these conversations about intimacy and eliminate the shame that is so often associated with sex. My basketball team is sex positive. It's pro-sexual diversity. It's pro-harm reduction. So basically we don't care how you have sex or who have sex as long as there was consent. So be sure to follow us on Instagram at my basketball team. And just a little bit more about me, although I'm originally from the United States, I'm sure you can hear my accent. I have been living and working in South Africa for the past 7 years. So I'm actually coming to you live now from Cape Town, South Africa. It's 11 o'clock at night for me here, so having some good late night conversations. And here in Cape Town, I work for an international nonprofit organization that teaches young people about their sexual and reproductive health using soccer, or football, as most of the world calls it. And I manage our global strategic partnerships across Africa and the Western Pacific. Why is it important to talk about sex, have these conversations? For me, sex is something that's not only personal, but it's professional too. It's so critical that we have safe spaces for people to discuss their real and honest, opinions about sex, not only with one another, but with their partners and with their family members. And, I think when people have accurate information about sex and consent and healthy relationships, they make informed choices for themselves. And I love talking about it in sort of a fun and entertaining way, because I think more often than not, we hear a very sort of preventative kind of way. But talking about it in a way that's, very sensitive and open to diverse and dynamic experiences is something I really try to emulate. So that's me. Happy to be here.
And I can very much say the stories on my basketball team is very sexy. If you guys ever read it, please, the link is in the chat box. So when you're late at night, especially on a Friday or Saturday, depending on where you are in the world, grab a nice glass of wine or drink and just make your way through it. You'll thank me later. And we're going to Olive, who is also another, has a few sexy reads.
Cool. Thank you for having me. First and foremost, how lucky am I to be on a panel with Nicole? And, you know, my basketball team is amazing. You have to check it out. Thank you, Melissa, for curating this. And thank you guys for showing up. This is for you. We're glad you're here. So, you know, like Melissa said, use the chat, use it freely, whatever you want to talk about, we're at your disposal. My name is Olive Persimmon, and I am a speaker, an author, and a communication coach. My last 2 books were about this spicy topic of sex. The last book is called The Coitus Chronicles, and the book before that was called Unintentionally Celibate. And I have a new book coming out in November, actually. Very exciting. Thank you. And why is it important to talk about sex? I would say, Melissa, I am the poster child for why sex education needs to exist, in the fact that I came from an abstinence-only education. I was grossly undereducated. I didn't know the difference between a vulva and a vagina until I was in my 30s. I didn't know that you couldn't lose your birth control or a tampon up there. Actually, this is a funny story. My friend, I told her when I first got I got a Nuva ring, which is like a little rubber band you put up inside you. And I was like, what if I lose it? And my friend was like, where do you think you're gonna lose it? And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, do you know how your body works? And she was like, your vagina isn't the gateway to Narnia. You don't just magically lose things in it. And I was like 29 when I was having this conversation. I had a lot of fear around intimacy. I had a lot of fear around sexuality. I was sexually repressed. I was celibate for over 5 years. That means I didn't have sex from 25 to 30, from 25 to 30. And I wanted to find love, and I knew I was not going to be able to have a real relationship with someone until I started confronting my insecurity around my own sexuality and intimacy. And I think why we have to talk about it is there are so many people in my boat who are so afraid to have these conversations with their partner, who are so afraid of real vulnerable intimacy, and who don't know the difference between a vagina and a vulva.
Yeah, and I think that that's an interesting thing you point out because I know for sex education as well as the topic of sex itself, it is very much more focused on the biological aspect and for reproductive purposes. Like I know for me, I grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Like a lot of the sex education that we did have, it wasn't a whole lot, but the education that we did have was focused on the reproductive, you know, like the miracle of life and how beautiful, like here's the body, draw the fallopian tubes, great stuff. And I get that, but at the same time, there's still, I feel like, no emphasis on the intimacy part, the vulnerability part, like the connection, like what happens, like what else happens besides when during coitus, which is when penile penetration into the vagina. And then there's also a lot more different types of sex, right? It's not just the penis and the vagina anymore. And then even for women, like we are always taught, like we had this conversation earlier with Nicole, like we're taught to call it the vulva something else. Like vagina could be a dirty word. Like you call it, like I've called it like the Pikachu, I've called it her. Like why is it that there's so much shame? But like a guy would be like, yeah, that's my dick, that's my penis. I was like, that's right, that is your dick and your penis. But like for the girl, we have to like clean it up because we have to censor it. So I think you brought up a lot of really great
like
points.
The Pikachu, you just explode on like I mean, that's kind of fun.
It's cute, but that's what a Pikachu does. It's electrifying. Anyways, so we're gonna get started. So first off, why do you think it's so hard for people to talk about sex? Whether it's with your friends, your families, your partner, what are some of the typical barriers? And I know for Nicole, this is your work. Like you do a lot of this in your organization. If you, can you not unmute? Oh no, just don't mute yourself anymore. Can you do it? Hold on, sorry. Got it, okay.
Thank you. I just sent a message, I was like, I need to unmute me.
It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so many there's so many people feel uncomfortable talking about intimacy or all these things, right? It's cultural, there's religious challenges, societal pressures. There are all sorts of different factors for why, we're being told we can't talk about sex openly, we can't talk about it publicly. Maybe our parents to us had a conversation about sex or pleasure. I can tell you that, my mom never had a conversation with me about masturbation and what it's like for me, right? And so it's like, okay, well, I have to go and figure that out on my own then, right? And so like, if we're not having these conversations with our parents, if we're just hearing about it from like older siblings, if we're just seeing, our friends at school, like, well, what did you do and what did I do, right? It's just like nobody has this accurate information. So I just feel like, because of sort of these societal pressures and religious constraints and things like that, we've been sort of conditioned to believe that we can't just speak openly about it. And I love the shift that we're seeing now, where people are beginning to very openly and freely chat about it. And this is what I love, about the way that Olive speaks about her sexual experiences and the books that you're in, to just put it out there and to just be like, this is exactly what's happening to me. Because, when we share our own stories, which is what I love about my basketball team, when we share our own stories and our own experiences, we are allowing other people to share theirs as well. They read that, they see that, and they think, okay, cool, this happened to someone else. I was the only one that happened to. And we have to have conversations about that.
Amazing. Olive?
Oh my God, Nicole, I love what you just said about the whole goal of my work entirely is this idea that we feel so alone. We feel alone in our loneliness. We feel alone in our insecurity. We feel alone in our knowledge. And we think everybody is having more, better, kinkier sex than we are. At least that's what I thought. I don't know about anybody else. That's what I thought. I think it's hard to talk about because Melissa, when you were talking about your sex education, I thought that was actually very progressive. My sex education was somebody had some glitter in their hand and we had to go around and shake people's hands, and everybody who had glitter at the end of it had herpes. That was the education I received.
So how do you feel about glitter now? Holy shit. This fear tactics all the time.
I ruined my vacuum with glitter actually last year for my glitter birthday party.
So you gave your vacuum herpes.
I got over it. I got over my glitter fear. The crazy thing about us not talking about sex is that fucking and eating are the two things that basically everybody does, right? Basically. Majority of people probably fuck and they probably eat. And we have so much trouble talking about the former one. And I just think it's because it's this very intimate thing that it's this incredible, beautiful, godlike thing that happens to us. You have incredible experience of pleasure. You connect to this almost divine place. And I think it's just hard for people to talk about things that are that vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Sex is vulnerable. And so I think we as a society kind of dodge around it, particularly in the US. And the way we talk about it, the language we talk about it, we either ignore it or we make it
dirty,
or a non-vulnerable
crazy, scary.
Mm-hmm. We use language that makes it seem less sensitive and intimate than it can be.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that's the interesting thing is that intimacy, love, vulnerability, sex, it can be such a beautiful thing. It is a very complex area of your life, and I can I don't have any children, but I can understand as a parent it being very difficult to try to explain what happens when you have sex beyond the physicality of it. And I think you brought out something that's really interesting is that typically in sex education there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame in the conversation. There's a lot of fear revolving around having sex, STIs, which are sexually transmitted infections, what happens, and that causes a lot of people to as you mentioned, either focus on abstinence, which is not as realistic, especially in modern day with how sex driven the media and society can be, right? Young children are always bombarded with advertisements and different things like that, and images of people have it, like being intimate, sex, like in movies and shows, and yet there's so much shame and self-rejection and fear revolving around this topic. And so it becomes very hard to really seek out the education because we're so afraid to talk about it. We're so afraid to address it within ourselves, and we're so afraid to do the research because there isn't, I feel like there is a lot of research out there, but people have that mental barrier to kind of really go out of their way to seek help from like organizations that Nicole works in and how to have these conversations.
I would say, you know, and Melissa and all of you both already touched on this, but I think that, you know, for far too long, sex education has lacked the pleasure component, right? Most sex education has very strictly been about anatomy, right? And like, this is this, and this is that, and this is your body. And like, it's been like that. And then even in that context, are we learning about the clitoris? No, I didn't learn about the clitoris in my sexual education, the difference between a vagina and a vulva, like Olive so aptly mentioned, right? And so, you know, when I think about that lack of the pleasure component, when I think about the fact that, you know, we're not talking about what consensual, healthy sex looks like, when we're not talking about how sex should feel, and if it doesn't feel this way, you know, then these are the steps that you can take to either stop or have a conversation or dialogue with your partner or with partners or whoever you're doing what with. You know, I think because we don't talk about sort of, you know, us and ourselves, what pleasure should feel like, how this should be sort of complementing the sexual experience. And again, we don't talk about it because our parents didn't talk about it, because, you know, religion has told us that we can't have sex until marriage, you know, for all these reasons that we don't publicly, you know, speak about these things. You know, it's sex education, you know, sometimes, or, you know, or far too often can be this very sort of like rigid thing, when at the end of the day, like, sex should be fun, sex should be pleasurable, sex should be enjoyable. And if it's not those things for you, right, then those are things that, you know, we need to be able to have conversations about, either with the partner, either with, you know, with close friends or confidants, with our doctors, right? And so, you know, and so for me, I just, when I think about sex education, I'm like, you know, how can we move it into this space where people can just have these open and honest dialogues with the people who they feel comfortable, you know, speaking to sex about, so that people can start to really enjoy the experience and don't feel that shame, don't feel stigma, to actually ask the real questions that they want to ask.
Yeah. And I think one thing that you did, Nicole, was really interesting. I read your Medium article about your encounter with a partner, and like, while you were being intimate, you stopped the gentleman and was like, hey, like we're gonna put on a condom, and you're gonna show me you know how to put on this condom properly, because I teach sex education and we're gonna talk about this. And he went through it, and I remember reading it and I was like, first off, I learned a few things. I was like, yeah, you know, you're right. I feel like I knew how to do it and I have done it. But then I was like, you know, I feel like I still learned a few things. And two, it was still a sexy read. I feel like conversations about sex, like the ones I've been having the past few years, is fun. It can be fun. It can be sexy. It can be like attractive. It can bring you closer to whether it's your friend or family, or build better intimacy with your partner, because now you can talk about what you like, what you don't like, what gets you to reach orgasm, what is a hard limit. So I guess a question for both you and Olive is, how do we start these conversations?
Yeah, that is a great question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. How do we start these conversations? I do want to address something that I saw in the chat, because I think it's totally related to this question. And the comment in the chat is, I don't necessarily think not laying it all out there is a bad thing. And I agree with you. I think, you know, it's up to everybody. You certainly don't have to write a book about your sex life like I did. And I would be lying if I said to you that was easy for me. That was really, really hard for me, to know that people were going to know stuff about these intimate details about my life. Every single chapter I had to think about, do I want to reveal this? Do I not want to reveal this? I thought about the other person. I never wanted to tell somebody else's story or frame them a certain way. So I think Nicole kind of hit the nail on the head, and it's more about being comfortable enough to talk about it with your partner. Which most people really don't, because we have such a stigma around it. sometimes we can't even find our voice. We're doing this incredibly intimate thing with this person and we still can't find our voice. And this even happens to me sometimes. We still can't find our voice to say to our partner, oh, actually, I'm not really into that. Or, oh, actually, I really want to try this. Or, oh, actually, there's this thing I read on the internet about, you know, tickling or whatever. We feel so stifled because we've been stifled in this conversation in general. So how do you start having the conversation? This is an interesting question. I think it depends on kind of where you're at with your partner and who your partner is. But I always think honesty is the best policy. And first off, try to have the conversation before you're naked. It's really hard to have that conversation once you're already in it, or you're already naked, you're already vulnerable. So if you can have that conversation before, you just come to the table and you just say like, hey, it's really important to me that we talk about sex. And you can say like, here are a few things I want to talk about, like a condom is necessary, or, you know, I'm on birth control, or are we monogamously sleeping together? Whatever is important to you. If you're with a more serious partner, the easiest way I think to start this dialogue is a yes, no, maybe list. A yes, no, maybe list is just something you print off. It has a whole list of things and you just write like, yes, no, maybe. We can talk more about that a little bit later. I don't want to make this like a 25-minute answer. So I would say with a new partner, you come to the table honestly and vulnerably. With a kind of more experienced partner, you check out a yes, no, maybe list.
Yes. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
No, I like that a lot. I think, so I'll speak a little bit from my own personal experiences. It is not often that I am in serious relationships. I'm in very consistent relationships, but they're very casual. So oftentimes I'm out on the streets, meet people at a club. I'm like, hey, boo, you fine? Are we going to do this? Yes.
Yes,
no?
I love it.
Okay.
I feel like
and yes means
for women to hit on respectfully and consensually to make the first.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes means yes and no means no. But I was recently having a conversation with some peers, and they were asking me about, when we think about this conversation around saying what can you say to partners, and especially casual partners, right? There's so many people who go out, you're on vacation, you're at a club, you're at a restaurant, you're at the university library, wherever you are, get that feeling, you need some sexual healing, and then you find a consenting partner, right? And so some of my peers were asking me, well, how do you have a conversation around when was the last time your partner was checked for STIs? And I was like, that's super interesting. And someone was commenting saying, someone was commenting saying, I always feel a little bit awkward asking my partner or whoever this person is when the last time they were tested. And I was like, why? I was like, if this person feels comfortable enough to ask whether or not they can put their dick inside of me, they should feel comfortable enough to answer my question around, when was the last time they were tested for an STI. And for me, and with that question specifically, it's not, for me, really, it's not even about how they answer the question. I got tested 2 weeks ago, I got tested 3 years ago, whatever. It's more about how they respond to that question.
Mm-hmm.
Does that person, do they get super offensive? Does this person feel like I'm, sort of like slut shaming them or something for asking them a question like that? Or are they like, wow, I haven't had anybody ask me that before. This is the last time I got tested. Here's my results. I've had men literally pull out their charts and be like, you want to see this? And that to me is such a turn on, because I want a partner who cares about their sexual health. I want a partner who can say, this was the exact date and time I got tested, and this was the clinic that I went to. Do you want to go right now? I'll be like, yes, let's go right now. And that to me is very attractive, because I want a partner that can have a real conversation, with me. And for me, the easiest way to just start the conversation is just to ask. And I know that's much easier done, but the little things you can ask here and there. When was the last time you were tested? Do you want me to do you? Do you not like that? Just like little questions here and there. You start there, and then hopefully that can, spark this broader conversation.
Yeah, I love that. Was so freaking great. It's like, instead of bringing up, like, there's this joke of like, oh, like to attract women, like men just hold up like their credit score. Instead of that, just hold up like their last health check. That is so funny.
Check.
It's so great. Yeah, I think it's interesting because and like I have like, for this conversation as prep, like I thought of like, okay, I'm at a different stage because I openly will just bring it up, like friends meeting, like dates, different things. Like I will just simply ask, like, yeah, like what's the craziest shit that has happened to you on a date, right? Like that's always like a great segue. Like, and I think that when you're starting having this conversation for the first time, example of language is really important because you're just like, I don't know how to talk about this. I don't know how to set up the scene. Like, what? How do I read the room and stuff like that? So when you've had these conversations often, you kind of can pick up the cue. So I definitely understand that there is like a gap there. So from my experience, I will start out like as whether it's friends, whether it's like a potential date or someone that I'm interested in, I will start out like, yeah, what's the crazy thing? Like tell me your crazy date stories. Like, what are some things that like funny has happened with you and a partner, right? So they're already thinking about that, and then we go into like, yeah, like what's the craziest thing someone has asked you in the bedroom and you said no to? Like I've had that happen on a date. And the guy communicated. Like I went on a first date with a guy. It's funny because he is American but grew up in England. And the belief is that like usually with English culture compared to American culture, it's a little bit more reserved. Like they don't want to talk about sex is what I was told. And so I asked him, was like, yeah, what's the craziest thing? Like what is something like you're really into? And then someone said no. Or no, I asked the question, I was like, what is that? And he's like, oh, well, you should answer first. I was like, oh yeah, some guy asked if he can come on my feet. And I was just like, no, like that's a hard limit for me. And he just like looked at me, he's like, oh, you're not into that? And he looked so disappointed. And I was just like, I'm sorry, is that something you're into? And then like there was no shame in it, but it was just like a surprise that like he admitted it or like confirmed it. And he just like looked at me because we were getting like gelato. Like there was no alcohol involved. There's nothing that happened. And he looked at me in shock. He was just like, holy fuck, I can't believe that came out because I've never talked about that. And I was just like, no, like that's fine. That's like, there's no shame in that. Like, it was funny how it came out, but it was just more so like, oh, like, and then we started talking like, yeah, that's not really something I'm into. Like, that's totally cool. There's no shame. Like that's totally fine if you're into that. And then we started having like more dialogue. And I think like examples like that of like funny questions of like, oh, like what are some things that you tried, or like what are some dating fails or sex fails, or like what are funny like sex stories that your friends have had. Sometimes when people aren't comfortable, you could always say like, oh, what are funny like stories that your friends or that you've heard of. And that's a great way to kind of like turn up the temperature without them feeling like they're in hot water. And also I think like when you're having these conversations, like your vulnerability is important. Like Nicole brought up like, hey, how were they responding, right? But if I were to model that like, oh, I feel a certain sense of shame and rejection of like, oh, like this is disgusting, this is not cool, then they're not going to feel comfortable like holding the space and revealing themselves. So I think like creating that safe space, making it fun and lighthearted, and again, back to what Alice was saying, knowing what you like and being able to share that, and then that creates a space where they can share what they're into, and then like start the dialogue from there.
Yeah, can I add to this, Melissa? I think something fascinating about what you're saying is this conversation with me on a first date would make me so uncomfortable.
And that's okay.
No, that's what I was gonna say but that's where I think everybody has to, the thing about sex in general and these conversations is you have to understand where you're at first. Like there's nothing wrong with wanting to have this conversation on a first date. And if the person you're with is like, yeah, I'm into it, let's do it. That's totally fine. And there's also nothing wrong with, for me, we don't have that rapport yet. I don't know you like that. I'm not trying to talk to you. I don't even know if I want to go see you again tomorrow. I'm not trying to talk to you about sex, and that's totally okay. I think this is one thing we get into trouble with sex is we try to make like a one size fits all. Like This is the conversation you have. And that's just not, you got to first just assess where you're at. And when you're having this conversation with your partner, you've got to be reading the room too, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right, so next question. For those that are comfortable, how do we actually read the room and judge if the space where the conversations about sex are welcomed and appropriate? Someone wrote, I struggle with this because I don't think sex should be taboo. So I frequently know what environments is less welcomed in. I just don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. So great transition, Olive.
Gosh,
Yeah,
Nicole, I'm gonna let you go first because I gotta think about it.
Sure. I think knowing your audience and contextualizing the conversation around intimacy is so important. I'm not gonna jump into a conversation around, like your favorite rope bondage techniques if you like don't don't even have sort of an understanding of like when you can say no to a partner that you don't want to do something, right? Like you really, what Olive said, you have to absolutely meet people where they are. And I think I have like intergenerational conversations about intimacy. So to like my parents, for example, or talking to, young adults, across different countries who have never possibly publicly spoken about intimacy or sex or any of these things. I feel like, you just have to meet people where they are, right? So I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I think like this concept of a sort of a safe space is really important. Like if you are amongst people that you feel like you can bring this topic up in, then you're going to bring it up. If you don't feel like your opinions are valuable, if you don't feel like if you feel like someone's going to react really negatively or harmfully to a question that you ask or a statement that you ask, so really just making those, and then I think making people just feel incredibly comfortable with things that might seem, like atypical. So for example, in some of my work, we think about different fluids that transmit HIV. Okay, so breast milk, for example, one of the fluids that can transmit HIV. So I often get a lot of questions men who are in sort of discrete couples. So maybe one partner is be positive and live. And their partner has just had a baby, their partner is breastfeeding, and it's finally come that time when the partners can start to be intimate again, and the men will say, okay, well, my partner is breastfeeding, she's got breast milk coming out of her boob, but we want to get down and I want to suck on those titties, but I know that is a trade, right? And they're like, can I do that? Like, and so the reaction for me is not to be like, like, how dare you take that breast milk away from your child because you want to suck on those boobs, right? The reaction for me is not that's just such a crazy question. Why would you ask that question? The response for me is like, it's like, oh, interesting. I think it's really cool that you want to pleasure your partner and that's something that you want to do to her, right? And so like coming from this background and this response of empathy, I think is really important. And no matter at what level of conversation you're having, very sort of bare minimum, basic, entry level conversations into consent, into what a healthy relationship looks like, things like that, all the way up to some of the more sort of like atypical things. I think it's just like when you approach people where they are, and when you respond with empathy and not with sort of judgment or any sort of disgust, then you're going to create that safe space for them to actually confide in you in some of the questions that they might not think they've been able to ever ask anybody else before.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because like similar to how people say like in long-term relationships, when you start having issues in the bedroom, it's usually a reflection of other areas. And so tying that back to what Nicole said of reading the room and kind of gauging the relationship, if you can't talk to your friends about like, hey, I'm not feeling well, I think I'm gonna have to cancel plan, and they freak out, like you're trying to set boundaries and trying to like be more vulnerable, and other examples of that, and they kind of are like more aggressive with that, then that sounds like it may not transition well. So I think that when you're trying to read a room, like for me, I transition a lot of dating into conversations about sex because it feels like a more natural transition. So if I can talk to you about like preferences in dating and things like that, and go and start sharing like, oh, respectfully, like showing like, oh, like we tried this, like kind of give like little breadcrumbs and see how they respond, whether they're more like open, like, oh my God, that sounds so juicy. Like, what, like, how did you do that? Or how did you like start that conversation or whatever it is? Then it seems like they would be more open to it rather than just like kind of like going all out and be like, hey, when's the last time like you've been flogged and all this other stuff. So I think finding how comfortable you are based on what Julie said, like you don't have to talk about like the most atypical thing that you're really into at the time, right? It depends on where you are and how comfortable and what you're comfortable talking about with your friends, your family, your partner, and with yourself. I think a lot of times, if we feel a sense of shame and rejection, then we're not going to be comfortable exploring, and that's not a safe space for us to explore, let alone can we do that with someone else. Olive, what are your thoughts on this?
My thoughts are assess, ask, check in. So what do I mean by that? I would say first assess what is the likelihood you're going to have intercourse with this person. If you're 5 minutes into the first date, probably maybe not the time to bring it up. I've been on dates where it felt really too soon and it was a turnoff for me. Mm-hmm. Is it maybe then again, I'm not somebody who personally is into casual sex. So keep that in mind. That's coming from that lens. Are we maybe on our 5th date or whatever, and I brought an overnight bag and the possibility seems there. That's going to be a little bit more appropriate than if you're like 2 minutes into the first date. So assess kind of where you're at. That's the whole reading the room. Ask. I think you call a spade sometimes, and you could just say something like, I feel really comfortable talking about sex, but I want to check in with you. How do you feel talking about that topic? And they might be like, it's really, I don't, and you might be like, okay, it's really hard to kind of break that ice. And so I think you can just be honest about it and be like, oh, I know it's so awkward talking about it, but I want to make sure I respect like your boundaries, and I want to make sure, whatever. And then I think you can check in. So let's say you're having the conversation, Melissa, I'm thinking about you talking to your date about the foot fetish. Maybe you're having this conversation and you just say, oh, I just want to check in. Are you comfortable with this conversation? We can totally move to a new topic.
Yeah.
And give them an out. Mm-hmm. If they're like, oh, I'm feeling really awkward, I think that the fact that I had to think about this so long is indicative of how hard it is to have this conversation sometimes. But it's hard, but it's necessary. So you have to let the necessity override the awkwardness of it, right?
Yeah, and I think that you pointed out something great is setting that boundary in the communication, because you're right. Like I've been in dates and or like just like conversations where someone will bring up a topic, whether it's like, hey, like even if we're texting, like I think like I was doing some online dating last year, we were texting and someone's like, oh, like how likely are you to like kiss on the first date? And he was kind of gauge into that, and I was like, well, I think it really depends. And then we started talking about other things, and I think he was really trying to gauge to see if I am open to hooking up right away. And I had to learn myself how to communicate that boundary, saying like, yeah, like I find you attractive. I would be interested, but this isn't the pace that I personally move in. And if you're not cool with that, like that's fine. But I'm just want to let you know, like, this is not something that I typically do. And in a way kind of like pivot that to communicate that boundary and standard, and then see how they respond. Because I think for me, and Jeff brought this up, like safety is a really big thing, right? So Jeff said, for context, safety has always been the number one priority of many of my female friends. So giving off the right impression and allowing a female to feel secure with me has been a priority. I think that's amazing. I feel like more people should think about that. And I think that those that don't take into consideration of the anxiety that a lot of people, especially female identifying humans, have regarding safety and the fear that they have of being attacked. Because I know I have that fear all the time. But I feel like bringing it up may break the trust or sense of security. So this ties into his earlier question of, as a heterosexual male who can read comfortability pretty well, I often stay away from the topic to not make it sound like I'm trying to have sex with them right now, which is great. So how would I be able to bring it up without sounding like a quote hungry male, or a guy who's only thinking about sex? I think that's a great question, and I think that more people should ask, like, how can I engage in these conversations in a sensible and respectful manner.
And I think I'll just, go ahead, Olive.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think it's really important too, that the conversation around, sort of asking for sex or interest in sort of engaging in sexual activity, extends even once sexual encounters and interaction has started. We've had this whole conversation, around consent and getting permission, from a partner to engage in any kind of sexual activity. And, and this whole idea that both Melissa and Olive have been, speaking so importantly about, just asking questions, giving people an out, that extends even after you've already had sex with someone and now you're having sex again. That extends to even during the sexual encounter. Maybe I've said yes to one certain position with you, but I did not say yes to this other position that you're now trying to flip me into, right? And so really, every step throughout that process, every moment, of sort of a sexual encounter or interaction, or even if it's just, even if it's just touching, right? We often say, like, we talk sex, right? But like, touching and other sort of form of play, use of toys, all these sorts of things, I think are you need to ask your partner or whoever you're with, at any moment, whether or not they feel comfortable. And at least for me personally, as someone, who really values a safe, sexy sort of situation, I always say, like, #safe is sexy. And I mean that in terms of protection. I mean that in terms of consent and, whatever. When a partner asks me, can I touch you here? Can I touch her? That's not even, that's not sex, right? You're just like, you want to stroke my arm or stroke this or stroke that. But like when they ask, to me, that is almost, again, even more of a turn on for me, because you've asked me for my consent and for my permission, and we're having that dialogue and that conversation. And, sometimes it's awkward to be like, nope, can't touch that. Nope, don't. But then we laugh. I'm like, okay, cool now, but you can't touch me here, right? Or you can't do this to me here. So, just even before or sort of after, about like sort of asking about sex in the beginning, continuing that conversation during the encounter or encounters is also really, really important.
Olive is frozen. All right, we're gonna give her a minute. I definitely agree. And it's funny because I was in a Facebook group, and someone who identifies as a male said he's afraid to kiss a girl on a date because he's afraid of being canceled like 5 years later down the line. And I asked him, I was like, why are you afraid of that? And why wouldn't you just ask, like, hey, like, can I kiss you? And he's like, oh, well, I was told that like by a girl that like you should just do it, and you should just grab her and do it. And I recognize that from, because like there's a part of like there's a very like romanticized part of me that's like, yes, and like the rom-coms where the guy just is like feels so passionate, grabs a girl and kisses her, like that was really interesting. And that can be really sexy if that relationship had developed in that manner, right? But I've also been on dates where a guy would ask, like, hey, like, can I kiss you? And I was like, you know what? This is actually really, like, to Nicole's point, like, really sexy that, like, he took the time to ask. He, like, obviously my consent is very important. And just be able to build that relationship. So I was like, yes, you can. And we had a great time. And I think that when, like there are ways to do that doesn't kind of break the tension and the mood and different things like that. And so that is also really interesting. And then I also comment like about the whole cancel culture. I was like, hey, you can really communicate. Like if someone's like, hey, well, if you do that, if you ask me that it ruins the mood, I would say, well, the mood I'm trying to set with you is respect. And I care about like your respect and your consent. And so I want to create a comfortable environment because I am attracted to you and I want to see you again. And so like by setting that up and communicating like, hey, I'm just reaffirming that I'm attracted to you and I'm reaffirming that I'm interested and I want to, but I want to prioritize, like Jeff said, your safety and your comfortability. And someone said, that is so important point by Nicole. Beyond boundaries, the dialogue is also attempting at establishing a level of comfort level between two partners or multiple partners. Yeah, I definitely think that's important. Like, I think that comfort and compatibility is very important. So Ala, we have you back.
Yeah, sorry I got kicked off. So if I'm redundant, forgive me. I love this question because there is such an idea that the minute you say something, you killed it.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, when you're doing things in the dark, it almost feels like you have more permission. And so you don't have to address it. And that's the same thing. Like you're sitting in the cab going home with someone and it's like, you know what's going to happen, but you're like, if we say it, we're going to fuck it up. And I think everyone should make themselves an expert at just being sexy about it. So what does that look like? Jeff, that could look like you just like lean over, you lick your partner's ear and you just say something like, I am so attracted to you and I want to make sure that this is a great night for both of us, right? Or something like that. That's assuming it's a more casual partner. If it's someone you're with a lot, you could do kind of the same thing. You lean over, you do the ear lick move, and you just say like, you know, I want to make tonight about your pleasure. Like, can we have a conversation about what that looks like? And just be like, just a few basics, right? So how can we make ourselves like sex? It doesn't have to be like hey, like what I talk to you about.
Just taking notes. This is great.
You can be sexy about it. But I think there is this idea that like the minute we address it, it's done. And, you know, sex is a very intimate thing. So you want to find somebody that you can be that vulnerable with. So that's my suggestion. Become an expert in making the conversation sexy.
Amazing. So Olive brought a great transition because another question that was submitted was, how do you navigate vulnerability? Who wants to take a stab at that one?
Olive, you want to go first on that one?
Sure. I guess I'd love some clarification on what that means. So if the original question asker, I guess, does that mean vulnerability? Because vulnerability can be everything. That can be talking about trauma you faced as a child. That can be talking about your eating disorder. That can be talking about sex. Since this is a conversation with sex, I guess I'll stay there. So how do you be vulnerable when it comes to sex? That could mean anything from saying, I want to try some fetish stuff. I'm into tickling. I'm not into you spanking me. I think that the thing about vulnerability is the minute you put down your wall, you're giving other people permission to put down their wall. Mm-hmm. So that's true with your friends. The minute someone kind of breaks the gap about like masturbation, like the minute one person in the group is like, hey, I wanted to ask you about this weird thing that happened to me. The other people are kind of like, oh, that kind of happened to me too, right? Same thing with your partner. The minute you say to your partner, you can just call a spade, like, hey, I really want to talk to you about something. I really want to have a conversation about sex and I'm feeling a little awkward about it and I don't normally do this and my face is going to turn bright red, but I just want to try it with you, you know? And then that's going to let them come to the table the same way and be like, okay, I also feel really awkward doing this. And then you've at least given yourself a jumping off point. I think for people who've been together, it's not your first time being intimate. I do think a yes, no, maybe is a really good way to start the conversation. It just has a whole list of things. And it's not necessarily to find out like, okay, Melissa is into food play. She is not into watching porn. She is into, it's a way to say like, oh, you're into that? And they're like, oh yeah, you know, I always thought furries were cool. You know, it's just a way to be able to kind of bridge that gap from like, oh, this is awkward to like, oh, now we're having this whole conversation. And after that, hopefully it gets a little bit easier once you kind of make the leap across the bridge.
Yeah, and it's funny that you talked about that list because I've went through that list with girlfriends and guy friends, people that I was intimate with and wasn't, and went through. Like I remember one incident with my girlfriend, and we went through the list of like, hey, like, are you like went from like it was like, are you into like spanking? Are you into like paddling? Are you into like choking? Are you into all these things? And it was like yes, no, maybe, and we did like discuss. And we like kind of laughed about it because it was just like a funny thing. I was like, wait, what? Like, how do you, I can't remember what it was. Like, how do you, like, how does someone, and then she asked me, she's like, how do you sit on a guy's face? And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Do you want me to show you? And like, we started like this, like very fun dynamic of like, hey, like we're learning, we're talking about things we're interested in. We're talking about things that we've tried and didn't work or did work. And then we're like also modeling it for things that like, hey, interesting, like, do you know how to properly choke your partner so they don't pass out, or unless they're really into that, like, how do you safely participate on these different acts? And I think that without having that conversation, you're at a higher risk of hurting both emotionally and physically, because you're not sure of how to do that. And you brought up an interesting thing about like watching porn. Like sometimes, well, a lot of times porn isn't accurate, and it's from a very limited perspective, which is emphasize, depending on the porn, emphasize on the male pleasure. So you can't always, because of the lack of sex education, a lot of times young men or young children view porn as like, oh, okay, this is a way that I can learn about sex and try to repeat that. And that takes away from, and that doesn't develop the level of intimacy and vulnerability that a lot of us have during sex. Went on a little tangent. Sorry about that.
No, it's good. I was just going to hop in and say one of the things that has been so interesting to me since launching my basketball team, where I share, you know, these short stories submitted by people from all over, is how much people's stories that I think are so unique and individual resonate with so many different types of people. So for example, you know, we have about this one person who was rubbing coconut oil down their partner. They started rubbing coconut oil over this person's booty cheeks. And inside the booty cheeks, they found like a bunch of toilet paper, just like stuck all up in there, right? And this story just completely just cracked me up. I was like, this is just too funny. And it's so raw and it's so real. And I think like those are the types of moments in intimate relationships, when we talk about vulnerable, that people get so freaked out about, right? Like, you know, there's all sorts of, you know, different sexual desires and fantasies and fetishes and things we can discuss, but like the bare minimum, like what happens if my partner finds stuff in my booty cheeks? What happens if I accidentally fart while my partner me? Like what happens in these moments that, because they are really, really intimate, but then all of a sudden you feel like, oh no, like have I ruined everything? Do they never want to see me ever again? Is this like the end of my sex life as I know it? You know, but when people share their stories, and you know, when they're sort of honest about these really awkward, spontaneous, interesting sort of moments that happen to them, other people then, you know, exactly what Olive said, right? When you let your own light shine, you give other people permission to do the same, right? Marianne Williamson has that incredible, you know, poem that was in Coach Carter, and Nelson Mandela said it, and you know, all those things. But you know, it's just when you can share your real story and sort of be honest about those things, maybe it starts just with your best friend, and then it goes to a broader group of friends, and then it goes to that converse partner, and now maybe you're like me and you're talking to your parents about these situations and being like, hey, ever happened to you guys? What did you think of that story that was submitted, right? And just, you know, being able to share those honest things, that I think that sort of picks away at that vulnerability.
And these things happen. Like, I think that's the thing about, like, for me, a good compatible partner is one that we can do whatever we want to do, communicate it, and laugh about it. Like you're gonna have incidents where someone has performance anxiety. You're gonna have some like an incident where someone orgasms too early and was like, oh, okay. And then you're gonna have like these funny things where you like fall off the bed or whatever it is. And so I think that's I think having that rapport with your partner is like really important, because then that builds a level of intimacy and trust that, you know, like it's just gonna like roll off your back like that toilet paper.
I mean, toilet paper happens to the best of us.
Yeah, like we all use
does.
toilet paper.
It
It's fine.
It happens.
Yes. And so one question, so we're gonna, please feel free, if you have any questions, please share them in the chat. We have a few questions that we're gonna get into. This one is a really great one. How to talk to male partners about how to give women orgasms. It can be super hard to describe what you need, and even with willing and loving partners. Ladies.
Yeah.
Now's your time to shine.
I think a really fun thing to do is you could just play like a game of follow my finger, and you're just like, okay, I think gamifying it, I hate that term, but like making things fun and light. So it's not like you need to learn how to pleasure me. It's like, what if you just did this? You're like, hey, let's play a game. You're going to follow my finger with your finger. And then it's like, okay, then you level up the game. Then it's like, you're going to follow my finger with your tongue. And then it's like, you're going to do this thing. And then you offer to do the same on them, right? So you say, I want to do the same too. And see where from there. And you think, follow my finger.
Oh no. Hold on, Olive. You're breaking and you're cutting in and out. We're going to give you a second to get connected.
Video calls all day.
Nope, still having technical issues. So we'll just jump to Nicole really quickly as Olive gets reconnected to her internet.
Okay, if Olive comes back, I'm ready to play Follow My Finger, for the record. I haven't done that before, but I'm ready for it.
I've never heard of it.
You know, I think especially for, you know, for women or people who identify as women, you know, I just think that we don't even know ourselves. And so I would just sort of encourage, you know, all the women out there to play a little bit with themselves first, you know, before we start to have the conversation around, you know, how do we share this with our partners? You know, have you posted up in the mirror, legs like over your shoulders, looking at yourself and looking at, you know, exactly what makes you tick and what turns you on. Right. So figuring that out for yourself first, and, you know, with your own toys, with your own goodies, whatever you like to use. And then once you do have that figured out, I'm totally this, you know, follow my finger, you know, but also I think a lot of the times we don't, at least for me, I don't want to make my partner feel bad that they haven't hit the spot. I don't want to make my partner feel bad that they haven't made me come yet. At least for me personally, it's just very difficult. It's going to take time. It's going to take all these things, you know. So I just kind of have honest conversations, you know, from the jump, and I'm just like, look, you know, if you're willing to do this with me, you know, we're going to find this. We're going to go here. We're going to move here, you know. But it's not a reflection of you not pleasing me. It's not a reflection of you, not being able to turn me on, right? It's not any of those things. It's just like, you know, this takes time. I'm learning you, you're learning me. Exactly. And so again, this idea of like of creating these spaces where people just feel like comfortable to say, hey, look, let's figure this out together. Let's play follow my finger game. Let me show you. I'll do it. You watch. You know, all those sorts of things, and so that you're comfortable. Your partner feels like totally comfortable, you know, figuring it out.
Yeah, and I've had conversations with male friends and even partners of like, hey, like every body is different. especially with
100%.
especially like women's sexual pleasure is very different. And so I've learned that, you know, for me, I take a lot more work. And so it wouldn't be fair to my partner or to myself to be like, I'm just gonna lie here and let you figure it out and give no feedback. Like that's not a fun time
Right.
for either of us, right? It's more so like,
Mm.
hey, like, all right, like you, like usually the first time, like I don't know about anyone else, but usually the first time is always bad. Like it's just like you're still getting to know each other. There's always like these awkward moments and things like that. Like there's just some, or I shouldn't say bad. It's not as great as we probably think about when we're like super excited and expected to be. But more so, I think that being able to communicate and there are ways to like do it in a sexy way, would be like, hey, like wait, hold on, let me think of what I would say. Like, hey, like, have you tried this? Or like, oh, I really like that position. Or like, oh, like that really turns me on when you do this. And I've also given feedback. I was like, you know what? This position isn't doing anything for me. And the guy's like, oh no? Okay, cool. Let's switch it up. And I was like, great. Or I'll just be like, you know what? How about I take lead and I'll do this. And then the guy, honestly, like I've had people say like, yeah, this is great. Like do what you want to do and show me how to please you and figure and it becomes more of a collaboration. And then you're able to work together to get both of you there rather than just expecting one person to do all the work, because that's really not fun. Olive, are you back with us?
Oh my God, I hope so. I'm on video calls all day, every day, and like this 1 hour.
No.
But I'm on my phone now, so can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so if I'm gone, I'm gone. I'm here. What was the question?
How do we talk to men about women's sexual pleasure?
Oh yeah, I
We
was in the middle of.
We loved your follow the finger game.
Yeah.
I don't know where I cut off, but the follow the finger can turn into follow the finger with your mouth.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
And then you just offer to reciprocate. So you make it a game. Like you can even start on them if you want. You could even say something like, hey, I want to play this really fun game. And just be honest about it. Be like, I want to figure out what feels good for you. You know, be sexy about it. And be like, I want you to lead your finger everywhere you want me to lick. Tell me exactly what you want me to do with my mouth. And then you do the exact same thing for them. And be like, okay, do it like this. And then do it on their body. You know, you can just like, be like, use this motion and use your tongue on their stomach or thigh and ask them to mimic you. Yeah. And make it a fun game.
Yes. And so someone asked in the chat, how do you have a conversation about herpes? It's a great question. And I've had conversations with friends that have been diagnosed and the conversation and how they have that conversations with potential partners. Nicole, would you like to take this as the sex ed expert?
I don't know about expert, but I would just
educator.
I would just share that I think educator. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, whether it's herpes or HIV or any other sort of disease or STI or something like that has a lot of sort of like social stigma associated with it. I just think it's really important to be upfront, and I think again that's much easier than done. If we continue to sort of tout this idea that your partner should be someone who you feel safe with, your partner should be someone who is enthusiastically consenting to having sex with you and vice versa, then when it gets to the point that you start talking about intimacy, when you get to the point where you're starting to have conversations around what it could look like for the two of you or three of you or however many people are engaged in this, then I do think it's really important to just say, look, this is either I have herpes, this is the situation, and or you ask them what when was the last time that they were tested, or the other thing too that I think a lot of folks should do more and more is also, if you do your status or whatever around any of these things already, go get tested for a couple to do. Or,
oh no, more technical issues.
Say,
Hold
hey,
on.
we're
it
here
got
to
cut
get
off that you
STI.
got tested.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was
Which is
just
a statement
saying,
in itself, just get tested, yes. But go on.
yeah, but I was saying get tested together. You know, go in with your partner and say, hey, we are here together because we want to do this act. It's very intimate. We care about our sexual health and we get tested together. So I think, again, in this, if we want to have partners who we really trust, who, you know, who we feel safe around, who we can be vulnerable around and not feel shamed or stigmatized, then we need to put things like that on the table so that we're being smart about our own sexual health and our partner's sexual health as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think the conversations that my friends have told me that they've had with potential partners is talking about like, hey, there is a very real risk that you can catch it. I'm taking precautions. I'm doing this. Like, here's where I am in this, right? Whatever the STI is, emphasizing like this, and it's completely your choice if you want to engage in this or not, and how that looks like. And I think that shows a lot of, and I completely understand, it shows a lot of vulnerability. It puts like emotional risk that the person could reject you, right? And because they know this very intimate detail. But at the same time, it is still emphasizing like consent and choice and the real reality of sex. And I think that it helped me realize that a lot of STIs are a lot more common than we think. And more people live with it. And I think like once you, like for me, like I knew about STIs, but I think like my perception of it, even though it wasn't negative, like it was like, oh, this is X, but it was just more so like, oh, I never thought and associated you with this, like, oh, okay, cool. And then I was like, yeah, how do I perceive like STIs and like sexual health and health in general? Because there's so many things about people that we don't know about. Another great question. Olive, do you want to add anything?
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on this question.
Great.
So I want to first off say to whoever wrote in this question, you are not dirty. You are still desirable. For a lot of people, this is not a big deal. And we need to stop treating STIs like they're this big bomb we have to drop on our partner.
Mm-hmm.
So many people who have STIs, it's incredibly common, feel like I'm walking into this relationship and I have to get them to love me. And when the timing is perfectly right, I have to drop this bomb and they might leave me. And my perception of STIs has completely changed since writing my second book. When I was younger, I did get diagnosed with HPV. I was told I had genital warts and it ruined my fucking life for years. I didn't date anyone. I didn't think I deserved to be intimate with anyone. I thought I was dirty. And then eventually I went, it's not a funny story, but eventually I went to the doctor and she was like, you don't have genital warts. You don't have HPV. And I had been living my life for these 2 years thinking that I was undesirable. And I developed this terrible fear of STIs from that experience. This terrible fear that I was going to get an STI and it was going to ruin my life and I would never find anybody. And I currently don't live with an STI, but I have plenty of friends who do. And I've seen some of them do it so casually and coolly, where they just even put it on their dating profile up front. I'm kind of a big fan of like, you play your cards, and if someone still wants to stick around, then it's not this idea that it's like a bomb that you have to drop. But because there's such a huge stigma around it, people feel like this is something like no one can ever know this about me. But a lot of my friends who have it are just honest about it right up front. And I love that. I think that's so cool because it gets it out of the way. And if the people don't want to stick around, that's okay. You're going to find somebody who absolutely wants to stick around, who absolutely thinks you're desirable and hot and sexy. And if it's not that person, that's okay. So whoever wrote in this question, I want you to just reduce some of your fear around it. You absolutely have to be honest with your partner. It's their choice. But I think people would be surprised how many people have STIs and how many people would choose to stay. And I think the earlier you can be honest, the less amount of time you're just carrying around this like bubble of anxiety.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Um,
Build off of that very quickly. Go ahead, Melissa.
no, go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna add onto that too. And especially with with STIs too, right? There's some that we can track, and like you just pop a couple pills and then you're good to go after like a week, right? So when we think about like chlamydia, gonorrhea, these are like really easy STIs to just like get in and out of like that. But when we think about things that are traditionally like more serious, like HIV, for example, we have had such this in the medicines, the antiretroviral treatments for people with HIV. I mentioned earlier having these sort of like schools where you have one person who's living with HIV and then they're not. If you are taking HIV medicine correctly and consistently, you can have unprotected sex and transmit the virus. That we've come in medicine.
Oh no, more technical issues. All
Okay,
right,
now.
frozen.
Oh, I cut out.
Okay, you're good. You're
Am I
good.
back now?
We're good, people.
Okay, good. I was just saying too, there's all sorts of, mothers who are living with HIV who have give birth to these beautiful babies who are not living with HIV. And that's a direct result of this sort of virus from mother to child, and these antiretroviral treatments that people can take. So anyway, so basically just building off of Olive's point that like STIs, things like HIV and herpes do not have to be these big, bad, scary things. And I love that Olive, that we need to really shift our mindset around how we approach people. So far, I wish we could normalize herpes in the coronavirus has been normalized right now, and the way we talk about it, the way that we talk about people who are asymptomatic, the way that we say, we're just gonna, it's fine, or it's just like I normalize the conversation around STIs in that exact same way. Until that point that Olive brought up, and just wanted to completely reiterate that.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Nicole. Melissa, I have to add one more thing on this, because I just think STIs are something that people let it ruin their sex lives. And it just doesn't have to. So Nicole, thank you for saying that. And it doesn't have to ruin your romantic life. And it's very common. And I just can't emphasize that enough. As somebody who lived with intense fear around STIs, I was so afraid of getting it. And I was so afraid of, I've just totally shifted my view on it. And I just think it's not as big a deal as we make it out. You still have to disclose it to your partner. You still have to figure out how to be safe about it. But it's not this like it's not this life ruining thing to get herpes. It's really not.
Yeah. Like I've had conversations with friends and the partners were like, okay, cool. Like,
Yep.
the condom, all good. And I was like, oh, great. How was it afterwards? And things like that. All right. So next question is, how do you have conversations about physical insecurities like stamina, reaching climax, size, body image? What do you think?
Olive, you wanna kick us off?
Sure. I'll say, I can't speak for everyone, but I have found when I have been, and these aren't typically casual encounters. When I've been honest with my partners, it has almost always been received with some level of compassion. If you're sleeping with somebody that you care about and there's a level of trust there, revealing those things really usually just brings you a little bit closer. I think we feel like we're going to get rejected, and it's like, if I say like, oh, I climaxed too soon, I think we'd be surprised to find that we're a lot of times met with understanding. I had a partner recently who he had some problems sexually with just ejaculating in general. And he told me, and he said he brought it up. He was like, what's the worst thing what's the worst thing you don't want me to know about you? And I like hedged and hemmed and hawed. And I asked him the same question, and he brought this up. He was like, I have some trouble ejaculating. And I was just like, oh, that's not a big deal at all. Like, we can work around it. I care about you, and I like being with you. And like, that's the thing that you were the most afraid to tell me about yourself. So I think
I think a lot of the rejection happens in our head first, or it happened when we were like 18, 19, and we think in our 30s and in our late 20s, like, we're still going to be met with that, like, rejection. And I think a lot of times you're going to be met with compassion and care. And the reality is, if you're not, that person doesn't deserve to sleep with you.
Exactly that. So yeah, I completely echo Olive's sentiments. I I recently had a partner who, you know, when he dropped his pants, he had no pubic hair, and not that was the first time I had seen that. I just hadn't seen that in a while. So he just was completely shaved, everything completely shaved, and you know, this is just me. I'm just very, I just say a lot of things. I'm like, I love open and honest dialogue with partners. So I just like him on his carriage right there. And I was like, oh, look, you don't have any hair. And he grabs himself and he was like, oh my gosh. He was like, why would you do that? Why did you say that? And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I disrespect you. Like, I didn't mean, I thought it was very interesting that you didn't have any hair. I'm like, full bush. Okay. and he was just like, no, I feel more comfortable without pubic hair. And I was like, okay. I was like, great. Well, that's your choice. That's your prerogative. And he was like, well, do you not like it? I was like, you do you, boo. If it makes you feel comfortable, then that's you. You live your best life. I'm not gonna complain. I was like, I'll comment. I might grab it a little bit, you know, just to play with, but, you know, I know you'll watch it again soon, but, you know, that's your decision. You know, that's your choice. And that's, you know, that sort of reaction speaks to Olive and what she was saying around, like, most of the time when you sort of reveal these things about yourself or share the things that, you know, maybe you think you're going to be a little like awkward or perhaps are like not the sort of typical standard for a certain type of person or whatever we think, really these conversations, I think when you're honest and open about them, should be met with compassion and empathy. And if they're not, then that's not the person for you.
I agree.
Wait, I have to add, I haven't had somebody who's been unshaved in a really long time.
Oh,
I think this goes back to the we think there's some sort of standard and there just isn't.
Wait, really? Isn't. I feel like all of my partners have been shaved.
That's what I'm saying. Most of my partners are shaved.
Oh, okay, cool. Because I was just like very confused. But like, yeah, like
some aren't.
There's everything for everyone. And I think that's the thing, is that everyone has insecurities. Everyone has things that they're kind of like, wait, don't look at it in the light, or like I just don't want to talk about it and things like that. That was me trying to be dramatic. And
I appreciate it.
And I think that in a good sexual relationship, a healthy one, you're able to talk about it. You're able to say, like, you know, like, I really, I'm trying to think of like things. Like I prefer like sex, like under candlelight, or I'm not comfortable with like this size, whether like, or my size, or whatever it is, right? And I think that there's people, the person or people that you're with, if they care about you, they're not going to care about that. And if in any way, if beyond the anxiety, if it affects the sexual relationship, there are different ways that you can go about that. And I think it's your choice of whether you want to or need to for yourself, right? Like it's like the similar idea with like plastic surgery. Like if you want to do it for yourself, I am all for it. Go do whatever you feel like you need to do, but don't do it for me, or don't do it because there is societal pressure to look and to look a certain way or be a certain way. But if for you feel like, hey, my body image, my size, or whatever that looks like, isn't what I want, and my partner is fine with it, but I want to do something about it, go explore whatever that option is. But that's, by the end of the day, it's your choice. I think you should still very much be with partner or partners that like love and accept you for what that is. And there's always different ways to go about it.
I love that. Melissa, can I just add one thing to that?
Please.
I think it's so funny what you just said, because it so illuminates, like, there are so many people who are loved by so many wonderful people.
Yeah.
And the idea that what we have, like our deal breaker is going to be the deal breaker that makes us unlovable, whether it's herpes or it's your stomach or it's your inability to ejaculate or it's your the shape of your labia or it's you
Breast
come too
size,
fast or you come too
stretch mark.
slow. You know, like we think that like our thing is the thing. That's like the worst thing, but it's like everybody, there's so many people loved by so many people, you know?
Yeah, and I've been in those conversations where someone would say like, oh, I would like, these are my deal breakers. And I've heard of like deal breakers. I was like, yeah, not most of the time, none of those things are deal breakers. And even if someone like I've been in conversations with women, they're like, oh, I prefer like a certain size, right? For example. And I was like, okay, cool. But like there's so many things you can do. Like that's not the end all be all. You know what I mean? And I feel like this could go into like a whole left field, but I don't know. I feel like if you really care about someone, like there's always a way to make it work. In like that aspect. Make sure it's healthy though. Just make sure it's
Yeah.
healthy.
I think that the idea too that there's a standard. Like I personally am 4'11". I like smaller dicks. I find larger dicks are just, it's too much, it's too intense. So I think the idea that there's like a standard, like all women want like tall men with huge dicks. Like, no, that's not gonna work for everybody. But that's like the, you know, so men, like people walk in with a deal breaker, like, oh, my dick's not big enough or I'm not tall enough. And it's like, no, that's a narrative you've created in your head based on society, but
Yeah.
that's not true for everybody, you know?
That is true. That is true. Nicole, what do you think about that? Sizes.
Yeah. Sizes.
Now that we're talking about it.
I'm a lover of all sizes, you know, and I just
shapes.
think
And curves.
it's not about the size, it's about what you can do with what you got. Okay. Yeah. You know, you can do all sorts of things to impress me. That's regardless of size. So, you know, if you want to bring the heat, then just bring it. Let's see what we can do.
That's so awesome. And it goes back to something earlier that we talked about, is that I talked about this with my partner of like as a joke, but it's very real, of like, hey, like you're gonna, like, for me especially, like you're gonna fuck my mind before you fuck my body, right? Like as I like will say that as a joke, but like really it's about the relationship, it's about the intimacy, it's about like are we comfortable, are we safe, like can we explore, can we play, can we do all these things, or is it just like, no, I just want sex and that's it? I'm like, oh, okay, like that's what you want, that's not really me. But like there's so much, that's why I'm trying to emphasize, like there's so much more than just like those kind of insecurities. So just want to be conscious of time. We do have 2 minutes left. If anyone's interested in staying a little bit longer, completely understand the time commitment. Ladies, I'm going to ask you the closing question so we can end the recording. And then if anyone else have any other questions, please feel free to leave it in the chat. So Nicole and Olive, what are you striving for as we wrap up this event? And thank you so much for sharing your time. We really appreciate it. We want to, as a community, we want to thank you by learning more about you and how we can be supportive. So first off, what are you striving for? Either one.
Should I take a crack at this first?
Go for it.
Go ahead, please go, please.
You know, honestly, for me, I am just striving for a world where people are making informed decisions about their sex and their sensuality, and in a world where we are sort of like and really approaching.
Wait, you're gonna have to start over because you're cutting out and it was really important.
Oh no, sorry. Okay,
you're good, go ahead.
Better now?
Yes.
I was just saying that I'm really striving for a world where people can make informed decisions about their sex and about their sensuality, in this world where we really value and respect the
diversity. Just cut out. I think that's what the word was. The diversity
and dynamism, you know, of people's different backgrounds and experiences and perspectives.
Awesome. Olive?
I would say all of my work revolves around striving to honor my own voice and empower other people to honor theirs.
Love it. And how are you working to strive towards these goals?
Yeah, I think for me, I try to accomplish that through writing. Most of my stuff is through writing. Like I said, I have a new little kind of fun coffee book coming out in November. And then the goal after that is to transition to TV. And then ultimately the goal is back to like, how do you honor and empower people's voice?
Oh no. Oh no. Empower you said TV. So book, TV, and
Did I
then
cut out? What the heck?
so sorry.
No, it's not your fault. It's that damn T-Mobile. Um,
So you're transitioning to TV and then back to something.
and then back to blah blah. It all goes back to empowering and honoring your voice.
Amazing.
Yes, girl.
How are you doing? How are you striving?
You know, for me, I have a super ambitious goal on my basketball team to post one story a day. So get a story for every single day of the year. That is how I am striving toward my goal. So I'm like, everyone on this call, follow my basketball team, submit your short, sexy stories, awkward, hilarious, spontaneous. We will take it all as long as you consent to giving it to us.
Yeah. And I've actually submitted my story and I've been meaning to submit more stories. It was very fun. It was very fun. And so how can we help you? I think Nicole just shared it, like how you can help her. I just also reshared both Nicole and Olive's links and where you can find more information about their incredible work. So Nicole to share great stories. Again, it's all anonymous. Feel free to, when you go on, this will be a fun challenge for everyone. If you go onto my basketball team, I would love to challenge everyone to guess which story is mine. And if you guess it right, because now everyone's gonna go, nah, my story's on there. If you guess it right, I will DM you to confirm it. This is the only time I'm gonna confirm it, because I even like told my partner, I was like, my story's on there, but I'm not confirming which one.
and I'm not telling which one.
Yeah, exactly. So it's completely anonymous. So if anyone can go on there, like tag me, you can find me at that's not my name. Melissa Taylor, if you think that story's mine, and I will DM you. For those that are correct, I will DM you. So helping you drag in there. Neither of Olive's links open. Thank you for calling that out. Interesting.
You can find anything you need to know at olivepersimmon.com. You can follow me on social media. It's Olive Persimmon. You can feel free to add me on Facebook. We're an intimate group, or you can follow me on Instagram. And I will say, if you're just starting out on your sexual journey, that's exactly what my second book was about. Like, I'm not somebody who was like wearing see-through shirts and going to sex parties. I hadn't had sex in 5 years. I'm not implying anyone on this call is or isn't. There's nothing right or wrong with that. I'm just saying that's not where I was at, and I was very much, I'd only had sex with 2 people in my entire life, less than 10 times. So it's about kind of overcoming a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. So that's called the Coitus Chronicles.
And I read it, and it's so fucking good. Like, I read it and I was just like, this is sexy. Like, I was like, Olive, you're like, I'm learning so much. And then I like shared it with my girlfriends, and then I was like, you have to read this, and guy friends. Actually, I was like, hey, like I talked to someone online. They're like, oh, I'm really new. I've only had one partner. I was like, you need to fucking read this book. Send them the Amazon link. I think I need a referral link at this point of how many referring you. But it is so good, and I love that it's inclusive in a way that whatever level of experience you're at, I think I'm pretty confident, like, even if you're really experienced, you could still learn something. And if you're not learning like a technique or a new area of like sex and sexuality, you can still learn a different perspective. And I think you wrote it in such a great way that, like, yes, it is called the Coitus Chronicles. I will link it again. See, this is it. Like, I need a referral link at this point. I need like a affiliate code. And you wrote it in such an interesting way that, like, I felt like I was with you, on the journey. And I remember like messaging you after. I was like, oh my God, I love your book. It was so well written, and like I completely get it. Can we go to sex clubs together? Like I want to go on these journeys with you. And you were just like, thanks. No.
Well, that's because I still am on the journey. Like, I think the idea that I've like arrived and I'm going to all these sex clubs, that's not true. So if I said no, it's because I wasn't going to the sex clubs.
Totally fair.
I'm still learning.
Totally fair. I was just like, oh my God, I feel like I know you.
I
Friends. We've known
need-
you for a while, but I was like, I feel like we're like a whole new level of intimacy.
I need to get this book to South Africa. I need here like ASAP. I need borders to open.
It started with the article. You submitted an article about like, I guess it's public, so can I share? It was like the article where you went to a BDSM.
Yeah.
Like that. It was just like so interesting, like just to hear like from your perspective of like learning about domination and submissive and what you liked and what you didn't like. And I was like, oh my God, like I want to go, like I want to do this, like someone tie me up, let's do this, like come on. But yes, so definitely check out Olive's book. The link is in the chat box. What else can we do to support you?
That's it. You can sign up for my newsletter if you want. There's a free yes, no, maybe list on my website. I mentioned it a few times. If you want one of those, it's a totally free download that I put together just because I think it's a really useful resource. So if you're trying to spice up your own love life, you can download the yes, no, maybe list on my website. And that's it. But thank you guys for tuning in.
Amazing. Thank you so much for everyone for joining. If Olive and Nicole is interested, we'll stay a few minutes after to answer any more private questions that are not going to be included in the recording. So in the meantime, we're going to wrap up the recording. Thank you so much for joining Strive Conversations. We hope to have making more uncomfortable conversations more fun. And we'll see you next time on Strive with me. Thank you so much.